All right, I'm ready to go. And so to begin our session today, just like before, let's take a few minutes for correcting our motivation to make sure that, first of all, we turn our discussion to be a Buddhist discussion through going for refuge, and also that our discussion contributes to a practice of the Mahayana Dharma motivated by compassion and the wish for enlightenment. And we do that through the generation of bodhicitta. And now, I think that discussion together is part of the Discovering Buddhism study program. So, of course, there's no expectation that you will definitely see yourself as Buddhist. Although I said that let's go for refuge and develop bodhicitta. If you feel that you are not ready yet to do so, it's fair enough. Don't feel obliged, or don't feel that you kind of deceiving yourself or deceiving anyone else. We're doing our best. And we want to be sincere and genuine with whatever we do. And so if you don't see yourself as Buddhist and don't feel comfortable about reciting the verse for refuge and bodhicitta, you can just think that you want to be of benefit to yourself in this life. And to be of benefit of yourself is, first of all, to look at negative states of mind, positive states of mind, to learn how to develop. We want to learn how to develop our mind well in this life, so that this lifetime would become more bearable for ourselves, but also that would be able to conduct ourselves in a way that is helpful and harmonious with others. So we can think about that, but we can also think of wanting to live a life based on love and compassion and generosity, patience, and so forth, which are also, again, beneficial to ourselves and beneficial to others. And that's, you can say, in some sense, still embodying the Mahayana spirit and the Buddhist spirit in general. And so, first of all, let's begin with taking 2 or 3 deep breaths as a way of starting to settle our mind. And turning our attention to the body and making sure that we don't store tension or discomfort in our body. And if you do find that there is some discomfort or tension, try to breathe it out and relax. Release it with an out breath. And so, in order to engender a mind that is more focused and stable, we'll turn our attention to the breathing process and count a round of 21 breaths. And so each breath is an anchor for a mind that becomes more focused and concentrated and stable. And if your mind tends to wander off halfway through, that's okay. Just bring it back to the breath and continue. And at the beginning of our session, of our meeting today, thinking that we have perfect external and internal conditions, making it possible to develop our mind. And while we might experience some physical or emotional difficulties to a certain degree, still, from the point of view of having the full capacity to develop our mind, we do have perfect conditions in that we have spiritual teachers that teach us, the spiritual directors of this organization, and also His Holiness the Dalai Lama, teachers from other Buddhist traditions, not only the Tibetan Buddhist traditions, but if you also receive some teachings from teachers in other traditions, you can also think of them as assisting your mental development. But also we have the internal conditions, a perfect situation that makes it possible for us to listen to the teachings, to think about them, teachings that are available to us, not only face-to-face, but also books and through the internet. So we have perfect conditions. And it's very difficult to find those perfect conditions because thinking of the world around us, thinking of you guys in the US, thinking of the number of Buddhists in the US, probably smaller in comparing to Christians and other traditions. And amongst Buddhists, those who are really genuinely interested in developing their mind, it's probably not many people are genuinely interested in spiritual practice. We have many people in the US, but also in Australia, that are culturally Buddhists, and that's completely fine. But having the burning urge to make the most out of this life, to develop love and compassion, bodhicitta, wisdom. Fewer people amongst those in the Buddhist world. And of course, we can think about it also in relation to the Mahayana tradition, as we have different Buddhist traditions, those who are keenly intent on becoming Buddha and know what needs to be practiced and have supportive conditions for the practice of few. And so even if we feel that we don't have all the best conditions, we're gearing up to that. So we think that we don't have a lot of time to do that till the end of our life. And so we want to make the most out of the time that we have in this life. Also recognizing that we have the Buddha lineage, which means that the nature of our mind, emptiness of inherent existence, is not different to the emptiness, to the nature of a Buddha's mind, to the emptiness of a Buddha's mind. By its nature, it's exactly the same. And anger, attachment, ignorance, pride, jealousy, and so forth are not inherently ingrained within the nature of our mind. And so not only we have the ability to practice the Dharma because we have external conditions, but also in terms of our internal conditions, our mind and the nature of our mind, we can remove all those adventitious defilements, anger, attachment, ignorance, the imprints, the seeds, because the teachings of the Buddha are available and we can interact with them to develop our mind fully. And in order to do so, we begin with first of going for refuge, in that we turn our attention with this sense of faith and trust in the Buddha, the teacher, the Dharma, the teachings that the Buddha gave, and the Sangha, the community of Arya Bodhisattvas, but also the community of teachers. And thinking that I'm going for refuge in order to develop my mind to be of absolute benefit to myself, but also of perfect benefit to others who are all around me, as far as the eyes can see, to the right and left, the front and back, above and below. Our universe is full of living beings. And so for their sake, I will become a Buddha. For their sake, I will develop the Dharma in my mind stream. And for their sake, I will become an Arya Sangha, being capable of showing the Dharma to them. And so with that in mind, we go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. We can think of the Buddha in front of us, surrounded by a community of Arya Bodhisattvas and our teachers, Holiness the Dalai Lama, Kartsön Lama Sopa Rinpoche, Geshe Sherab, or any other teacher that you're relying upon. And so to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I'll go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I'll go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. All right. And so let's start. In the previous session, we went through the presentation, part of the presentation that I prepared pertaining to the 10 non-virtues. And this presentation was in line of the presentation of, first of all, the general characteristics of karma, and then the specific characteristics of karma. And although there are myriad ways in which we create actions, we act, we accumulate karma and so forth, there are myriad ways in which we do it. Still, from the point of view of the main presentation of actions, the Buddha spoke of the 10 parts of virtuous actions and the 10 parts of non-virtuous actions. And so we began with the presentation of the 10 parts of non-virtuous actions. And the difference between an action and the path of action, just in general in relation to this presentation, is learning what are the different components that take part in the performance of an action that produce a certain result. And so an action is not just a solid unit of a particular thing. It consists of many different parts. There is a preparatory part, the performance part, the concluding part. And when we understand better what the factors are that play a role in the performance of an action, we'll also know how to at least reduce the efficacy of negative actions and to enhance the capacity of positive actions. And so we recognize that, first of all, I recognize that I'm still in samsara, and as such, my mind is still governed by karma and afflictions. And even though I do not want to behave in a negative way, inevitably I do so. I mean, it's sometimes an automatic process. Sometimes I have a conversation with friends or people and so forth. And even though in general, I would say that I don't want to tell lies, including white lies, sometimes, it just kind of slips out of our mouth, isn't it? Without even intending to do so. Now we have a conversation with someone, and although kind of we think that is a Buddhist practitioner, a practitioner of mind training, I don't want to get angry. I don't want to harm others with abusive speech. And we find ourselves in a heated conversation with others, and inevitably sometimes we say things that we come to regret later on. And so we recognize that it's impossible for us to avoid that for the time being. When we are not perfect. We're not perfect, and therefore we shouldn't have expectations to be perfect right now. For us, it's work in progress. And so the work in progress means also that we recognize the different components that play a role in the performance of an action, and we try to reduce negative tendencies and develop positive tendencies. And it will be, rather than something that we'll be able to accomplish within a span of a year or two, this is something that we take up as a project for the rest of our life. Not only for the rest of this life, but also we want to improve our behavior in this life so that we'll continue to do it in future lifetimes. It's quite good actually to think of setting long-term goals rather than short-term goals. If we set short-term goals, which are massive goals to become Buddha within a span of 5 years or 10 years, or in this life, of course, from a tantric perspective, we say that that's possible. But if we set those amazing goals, while currently we don't have the ability to invest our time only in Dhamma practice, we create ample opportunities for disappointment in the future. So we don't want to disappoint ourselves. We don't want to give up. We don't want to come to the conclusion that the Dhamma doesn't have any ability to help us to improve our mind. So setting reasonable goals and expectation is crucial. And so we want to learn the paths of actions to continue to do it for the rest of our life. It's a long-term project. And so we then started to look at the presentation of the 10 paths of actions. We looked at the 3 non-virtues of body, or 3 physical non-virtues. And then we started to look at the 4 verbal non-virtues. So we'll continue with that today. But before we continue with that today, I had a brief, I wouldn't say discussion. I had an email from someone about a couple of points that came up in relation to sexual misconduct. In the previous session, I spoke of what we find in the writings of Lama Tsongkhapa and other, I guess, ancient teachers pertaining to what constitutes sexual misconduct. And so I think that this is indeed a very loaded. I think it can be a very loaded discussion, particularly since we, I think, live in a very kind of fast-changing world. We have a much greater acceptance and inclusion for people, people from the LGBTQ community and so forth. And so we want our values now to align with the values of the Dhamma, or to the Dhamma to align with the values that we have at the present. And so the challenge is that when you read through those texts, you're going to come across things that make you feel uncomfortable, and it happens to me. And so, as I was preparing this material, I thought to myself, what do we do with that? Do I ignore what Lama Tsongkhapa says? Do I ignore what we find in other texts? It's not like pretending that it's not there, but it's not speaking about things that later on you might read yourself. Or is it possible to bring them on to discussion now and see if there are ways for us to look at that? So I think that it's difficult to be completely skillful in such presentation, particularly when we produce written materials and it is left with us, and later on someone else might read it without further commentary, or that we might read it in the future while not remembering what we said before. So kind of just having things in a written material, I agree that it's not always skillful. But then as I was thinking about it, I Googled, for example, Dalai Lama and homosexuality, Dalai Lama and same-sex marriages. I ran a few searches online and came up with sources of things that is honest, the Dalai Lama said, and is honest the Karmapa said, the 17th Karmapa. And it's interesting because His Holiness, in one of the things that I read, it was said that His Holiness was, in 2014, in an interview, he expressed support for same-sex marriage. And the interesting thing that he said was that when he looks at the Buddhist writings, the texts that he reads, texts that were composed by Indian scholars such as Vasubandhu. And so he says that, well, this is what Vasubandhu says in his text. And as such, I'm paraphrasing what His Holiness says, but he says that, it's not I can say, I'm going to throw out this text because because I don't like it. Or he said that also, I cannot really change what Vasubandhu said. This is what Vasubandhu said. However, he said, the way that I think about it is that if you have a consensual relationship between two people, and there is love in that relationship and supporting the relationship, and they also mutually influence each other in a beneficial way, His Holiness says, I don't see any problem with that. And I think that then we can think about it, I think, in a similar way in relation to different things that are also found in this presentation. Like, for example, in this presentation, Lama Tsongkhapa also speaks about other things that constitute sexual misconduct. Like, for example, I think that the whole idea is limiting our sexual activity to the sex organs, to basically procreation. And so I think that obviously now, we live kind of with, I think that sexual practices are sometimes discussed in a very elaborated way in public sphere. So, I think that we have a lot of ways of enriching our sexual activities, apart from me being a monk. So, for me, it's game over. But, this is something that we discuss in the public sphere. And so, again, the way that I think about it is kind of, while not wanting to completely, we're not wanting to think that what Lama Tsongkhapa said is rubbish. I think that, well, he said that in a particular point in time, what was acceptable when Lama Tsongkhapa was alive, in the 13th, 14th century, and what is acceptable now? Different cultural codes, different standards. What was also acceptable during the time of the Buddha, during the time of Vasubandhu, is different to what he said, what exists now. And so I acknowledge that. And I take the spirit of what I say. I want to live a life in which I do not harm others and I do not harm myself. I think that that's in short, that's a way for me to think about it. And of course, I think that when you touch it only on a superficial level, like I did now, not very deep, it could be like whitewashing what was said before in some sense. It's like as if it's not a big deal. Well, it could be a big deal for some people, but still, I don't want to kind of throw away the Dhamma altogether as something that doesn't help me because I don't like some statements. Yeah, I don't like those statements. I prefer them not to be in Lama Tsongkhapa sticks, but they're there. So I find ways to think about it differently and think of the bigger picture. That's at least what I think of for the time being. I think that, Michael, do you want to say something? Or
I was just curious as to when Lama Tsongkhapa wrote this, was he talking to you're talking to the general community, right? You're the only one who was ordained here. Was he talking to the general community, or was he talking specifically about monks and nuns who have made very different vows? And as you said, it's game over. So it really doesn't matter whether it's homosexual sex or heterosexual sex. It's game over if he's talking to people who have already taken those vows.
Well, I think that first off, Lama Tsongkhapa was indeed mainly speaking to a community of monastics, not only mainly speaking to a community of monastics, speaking mainly to nuns. And therefore, also, when you look at some descriptions of the things that Lama Tsongkhapa said, including also, I add to that also Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, when he speaks of, for example, the way to meditate on the unattractiveness of the body. It speaks about it from the point of view of how a male monastic looks at the body of a woman. And of course, now we can think of, but what if you're, even as a male monastic, you might be attracted to men, so it wouldn't appear, it wouldn't work out for you to think of the drawbacks of a body of a woman. You need to think of a body of a man. Yeah, you can change that. I think change that presentation to suit your particular mentality or particular disposition. But Lama Tsongkhapa indeed was speaking mainly to a community of monks. But in this presentation, still, I think that spoke about it also that affects also the wider community, not only for monks, but also lay people. But still, I think that since he was speaking to a group of monks, he spoke, I think, very elaborately about the different things that constitute sexual misconduct, because I guess that this is a point that needs to be made maybe very strongly to community of monastics. I mean, in a what if kind of world, what if Lama Tsongkhapa was amongst us at the present, and we would have had an ability to speak to him face to face? I wonder if he would have expressed different views. I guess that I would like to think that he would. I have two people that raised their hands, so Nitya and I see also Koldo. Let's start with Nitya.
I think Kodo was first, but
all right, cool. All right. Hey, Kodo, you go first.
Well, I was just, with all of that, I was just thinking, well, isn't that the whole point of renunciation of this mundane samsaric world? No matter what the issue is, just let it go and focus on the practices, right? No matter what it is.
I think that in general, you're right. In general, when we think of renunciating this world, regardless of what your, identity or spiritual affiliation or gender orientation or sexual orientation and so forth, at the end, we want to transcend it all. Mm-hmm. Now, like, for example, when we think of, for example, feminist issues. I mean, when I say issues, I think that not like, no, feminist ways of thinking, equality, and so forth, gender equality. Of course, we want to, since we live in a world in which kind of the patriarchy is still stronger, and we don't have equality yet between men and women. Of course, we want to promote, women rights or issues in general, but particularly also for us, as Buddhist practitioners. Of course, we can speak about it as part of our concern. But also, in an ultimate sense, when we think of Buddha, or when we think of someone that is liberated, they completely transcend gender. So when one becomes Buddha, it's not that it can be either a male Buddha or a female Buddha. They're both, or they're neither. They completely transcend that. And so we live in a conventional world. We work with that. But also, when we reify that and make that to be kind of paramount, we forget that actually also at the end, we also transcend that. It doesn't mean to say that those issues are not important, but they're important to a certain degree. At the end, we also transcend that.
My turn?
Yeah.
I'll own that I raised that issue. I sent Venerable Kartsön an email because my son identifies as bisexual, and I'm around a lot of young people for whom that's a really important issue. And I suppose I would really love them to feel that they can access the Dharma and feel really welcome in that space. And I'm just aware of the power of the written word. And I suppose my current limited understanding is that there's, the relative level that I'm operating in, like flood disasters and parenting. And then there's the glimpses of the absolute, where that stuff doesn't matter when those glimpses come. But I'm still really living in a personality in the relative world. And so I try and navigate that space and do my practices. And I certainly would never, ever suggest you throw out the Dharma because there's one thing you don't like. It's like in the Green Party, the locals here threw out the whole policy because they didn't like the anti-vax stuff, and I'm like, there's 99 other policies. But so I suppose it's more like, I was also researching this topic because I really wanted to be able to present Buddhism and invite my son to come to Chenrezig. And I really wanted to feel safe in that for him. And so for many people, that's like LGBTQIA+ rights. That's just a given. Same with women's rights. I work in the public service. That stuff's just given. And then I find this little kind of like glitch in some little parts of the Dharma where I go, just keep meditating through this. But it feels glitchy. And I want people to experience the Dharma the way I'm experiencing it, which is amazing. So it's more like, so I was Googling and the Buddha didn't apparently say anything about homosexuality. And so Lama Tsongkhapa, bless him, thank you for all the teachings. It came through then. And so it seems that Buddhism is also this vast, moving, growing teaching. And so can we not always also just give it that modern flair as we grow? And I'm sure there'll be things in 50 years' time that people then will say, oh, you guys were on a bit of a wrong course then. And I know that that's a bit confronting when it's Lama Tsongkhapa, he's a big guru. but I just think it's worth putting it out there that and in certainly terms of harming other beings, I know many homosexual people who don't have the chance to practice or have lost their lives because of microaggressions along the way. And the last thing to wrap up with, I suppose, my little soliloquy is women's rights. I read the part about abortion and I feel strongly that is killing. And yet if there's a sort of a list of non-virtues that says really consider that deeply before you go there, then from a perspective of looking at all beings as having rights and all beings wanting to have time to do spiritual practice, then from my limited way of thinking, I think then maybe you embed something under stealing around, if a man gets a woman pregnant and leaves her to raise a child for 20 years, that's actually stealing some of her potential in terms of her spiritual practice time or her ability to have a job. And so it's just like kind of making it a bit more complex so that the consequences of not doing something are taken responsibility for by everybody. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Nitya, for that. I think that as I said, after kind of reading your emails, I thought myself it's very difficult to be skillful with such written material. So, subsequently, I added a footnote, to that. No, I think that it's a good comment. It's a good comment because we are left with this material, and it is sensitive. So I added a footnote.
That means a lot. That means that I feel like I can.
Yeah,
speak to my son more openly. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, and I think that also another point is, I think that since we are, most of us, maybe not all of us, but most of us were born and grew up in a Judeo-Christian culture or society codes, we tend to conflate the actor with the action. And so, for example, someone that might have an abortion is a bad person. Someone that is a homosexual is a bad person. Whereas in the Buddhist tradition, rather than conflating the actor with the action, we have a list of here the 10 non-virtues, but in no way we say that because such a person has performed that action, they become inherently bad. And so that inherent condemnation, I think, is not, the spirit of that is not there within the Buddhist tradition. Of course, with some people, you'll have people that conflate the actor and the action, even in the Buddhist world. But in general, I think that there's strong emphasis in the Buddhist tradition of separating the actor from the action, kind of, thinking that some things are negative, but it doesn't make the person be negative.
Yeah. Sorry, I won't use up too much time. I really understand that. And I love that about Buddhism, come from a Christian background. It just, the sort of, and I think karma is such a complex, if there's dependent co-arising, then it's way more complex than I can understand. So if someone is suffering something in another country, I train my mind not to even go there thinking karma. I just go, how can I help? Because it's not my business. And I suppose what threw me a bit in that chart, it kind of had like a non-virtue, and therefore you'll go and live in a rocky, dark place with no water. Like it was quite, and it had that stuff, and I was like, what is this? So I was just a little bit thrown by that. But thanks for your explanation.
I mean, kind of the couple of things I wanted to add to that before we kind of continue with the other non-virtues, but a couple of other thoughts that arose in my mind in relation to that was, first of all, I know someone that is a monastic and also is transgender. And so kind of, it's not that kind of, it's not that they're banned or completely evil. That's one thing. Another thing is that when I think of the some of the Vinaya rules, pertaining to monasticism. I don't want to go into greater details, but that when you look at the prohibitions for monastics, there are certain sexual activities that are grouped in one category. If you do them, you do not lose your vow, but there is a certain infraction. And put together with other actions that normally of the other actions that are of the same importance. Like, for example, you would say that certain sexual activity and drinking alcohol are at the same level for monastics. And so it's not that, for example, being gay, for example, is way worse than drinking alcohol for monastics. So, it's not a kind of we pull up one thing and say that because you're such and such, because you're gay or because you're transgender, you're way worse than other things. It's more like it's part of the bigger picture. For monastics, sexual activity for monastics is certain forms of sexual activities, not all of them. There's also different degrees in general, but some of them are similar to lying, similar to this, similar to that, and so forth. Anyway, that's one thing. There was another thing that I wanted to mention and I forgot. Anyway, I might remember that later. Yeah. Shall we continue? And so I think that in the previous session, this is the footnote, by the way, though such views are found in traditional scriptures dating back more than 1,000 years ago. However, contemporary teachers such as His Holiness Karmapa have expressed their support of same-sex marriage, etc. Further evidence and discussion of contemporary approach to questions of sexuality can be found on the internet in general. Anyway, looking at so we've covered killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. We spoke of lying. We also spoke of divisive speech. And today I thought of picking up from harsh speech, speaking harshly to others. And so the basis for speaking harshly to others is a sentient being, another person, who has become the basis for the arising of a hostile mind. So this is actually something that I think that is quite interesting. So to speak harshly to someone, first of all, you need to feel a certain degree of animosity to another person. And so to begin with, before we go to the next parts of an action, you can think of, for example, I think that the basic example of something that will not constitute a harsh speech would be, for example, scolding your child in order to protect them from a certain danger. Now, as a parent, for example, you might feel the need in some situations to speak more strongly to a child in order to prevent them from endangering themselves. So you might think that, initially, if I speak strongly or harshly to another person, instilling some fear in them, is it necessarily a harsh speech? Well, here it says the basis needs to be something, someone that you feel animosity towards. Also, I think that, here, living here at the center for 17 years, we have situations where the geshes at the center spoke quite strongly to a few people. So you can speak strongly to someone with a sense of care. If the basis is animosity, that comes under the umbrella of harsh speech. But not only that, also, we'll probably cover that in a few minutes, but His Holiness the Dalai Lama spoke about it before. I remember him saying that with harsh speech, you can also speak quite nicely to someone. You might kind of your intonation, your facial expression could be quite nice, but if it's something that harms them, and that's still harsh speech. It's still a violent action. And so the basis needs to be someone who has become the basis for the arising of a hostile mind. Now, with respect to the perception, we spoke about mistaken and unmistaken perceptions before. Basically, in order for that action to be fully qualified action, it would be stronger if the basis is an unmistaken basis, like perceiving a living being to be a living being and so forth. If you perceive what is not a living being to not be a living being, like, for example, if you yell at the rock and think that the rock is insulted, obviously, it's not going to be a very strong action comparing to the action of insulting a living being. So Geshe Sopa says that the perception of what you are saying also needs to be unmistaken. So you need to also to acknowledge what you say. The affliction involved with that is any of the three poisons, which means that you can say something out of attachment, something hurtful out of attachment, but still to culminate that, you need to have also hatred or animosity. So you can speak ill to others because of attachment, obviously hatred, anger, and so forth, but also out of ignorance. And the motivation would be to wish to speak with a harsh speech. And so the performance is speaking unpleasantly, either truthfully or falsely about the person's faults associated with his lineage, body, ethics, or behavior. So lineage, kind of when Lama Tsongkhapa explains that, lineage in Indian culture, or even broader than that, Buddhist culture, could be in relation to the family situations, background, ethnicity, or whatever. So if we speak in a way that is disparaging, unpleasant, even if it's true, and definitely if it's false, about anything to do with that person, that would constitute a harsh speech. And to culminate that, the person does not need to be offended. We might speak harshly to that person, and there might be a wonderful Buddhist practitioner who will not get angry at all. They will not become deflated, but it's enough for them to understand what you're saying, for you or for us to incur that fault. And so sometimes we think that if we have a certain conversation with with another person, and we want to we are saying something that is hurtful, whether deliberately or not, and we think that actually at the end of the day they didn't take it they didn't take it heavily, they did not get offended, they said it's okay, so it's okay, I didn't incur a fault. If we speak harshly to others and they understand what we say, regardless of the reaction, we are incurring that fault. And so what makes the action of harsh speech lighter or heavier, is due to speaking offensive words to parents and the like, or to someone like a guru. So if we speak harshly to those who are very kind to us, it's considered to be a greater fault. So in general, by the way, we'll speak about it later on. There are certain things that make an action become lighter or heavier. And often we speak about the field of recipients. So there are certain objects that make our actions either very positive or very negative. And often in those fields, it is said that our gurus, our parents, someone that has benefited you in general, but also the impoverished or the dispossessed, someone in a pitiful position, someone that is worthy of compassion. If we perform negatively towards those people, more than other people, it's become with those people very negative. So I've said in the past, growing up, I had every once in a while, quarrels with my parents. Sometimes you say things that later on you come to regret. So with your parents is a stronger negative action. They were very kind to you. My parents were very kind to me throughout my life. Speaking negatively to them is a negative action, a strong negative action. Obviously, to one's teachers, spiritual teachers, makes it very strong negative action. If I speak negatively towards someone in a disadvantaged situation, someone that, if I hold power over that person and I scold them, abuse them, and so forth, because of the situation, it becomes way more negative. But also, the opposite side of that, if I perform positive actions in relation to that field, which means that if I become supportive of my parents or my gurus, not only supportive in a sense of helping them out financially or otherwise, but also if I have a sense of respect and appreciation to them. But also if I do that in relation to people that are disempowered, dispossessed, and so forth, it's considered to be very powerful actions in comparison with others. And so going back to this, due to speaking offensive words to parents and the like, or to someone like gurus, the action becomes very strong. Speaking offensive words with untrue and inaccurate lies and directly scolding, criticizing, or reproaching also makes that action be a strong action of negative speech, harsh speech. Now, the causally concordant effect of harsh speech is hearing much unpleasant words and quarrelsome speech. And so when we get into arguments with others, or when we feel that in general we are constantly attacked by others, in terms of mind training practice, we can think that I don't know what I've done in my past life, but if I believe in karma, that is a causally concordant effect in terms of what I've done in this life. So I experienced that in this life. I acknowledge that I've created cause and conditions for that before. I don't want to experience that again in the future. So I will then practice patience that can willingly accept such faults. And I will then also create, as much as I can, positive actions that will make sure that in the future I will not experience a similar thing again. And so the environmental effect similarly is being in a place that is full of logs, thorns, large rocks, sharp stones, and many broken bricks, that lacks waterfalls like ponds, is rough, drab, arid, salty, barren, vile, and so on and so forth. And it's a place of dangerous animals, scorpions, snakes, and so forth, and having many causes to be afraid. I mean, those are statements that I took from Lama Tsongkhapa's text and so forth. I think that we can work it out according to our particular situation when we think of how do I use the topic of karma in order to deal with my present situation as part of my mind training practice. So that's with the action of harsh speech. Any questions or doubts or comments before we go on to the next one, which is idle chatter? All right.
Lorna has a question.
All right, Lorna has a question. Sorry, Lorna.
Sorry, I double clicked on raise hand and then it lowered.
Okay.
What about, like I often find that when I'm talking about something that's happened generally in society and it's upset me and I use a curse word. I use curse words, like the F word comes out pretty effortlessly. And so I'm just wondering about that kind of speech.
Well, first of all, kind of it happens to me also. Might happen to you, some of you also. I think I said before, maybe I said it before, that I was I had an Irish partner, an Irish girlfriend, and I got so used to the way that she spoke, and it took me so many years of detoxing myself from the F word, and it's still for me work in progress. But no, so I blame it all on her. It's not my fault. Anyway, so I think that definitely, if we use many of them, it cannot be a positive thing. I think that it's quite common now in common conversation. I think that it is not a positive thing, but as far as harsh speech, if the basis is not hostility towards others, now we can become frustrated about something, but it doesn't have to be hostility towards a particular living being or a particular group of people. Now, when you look at anger, for example, and the sources of anger, from the point of view of the presentations of mind and mental factors, it says that anger arises towards suffering, the cause of suffering, and sentient beings. Or maybe in a reverse order: sentient beings, suffering, and the sources of suffering. And so you might stumble on a stone, or hit your toes on the corner of a chair, and you might inadvertently, say the F word or whatever. I think that, it's not a positive thing, but I don't think that it's considered harsh speech within that presentation, because it's not that you have ill will or aggression in relation to a particular person.
Right. Okay.
I mean, that's the way that I think about it. I think that in general, we can still think of path of action. So the way that we communicate with others, in which even if we do not have an intentional, deliberate intention to harm others, it is possible that others will become upset by the way that we speak.
Right.
I think that, if I hit my knee against a chair in a church and I exclaim, the fuck word, or the F word, I think that probably it will, people will find it disturbing. So you can say that if I don't watch my speech, others will become offended or disturbed, even if I don't mean it deliberately. And so there's still consequences to my actions, but it doesn't constitute a complete path of action because I do not do that with hostility.
I understand. That makes
No,
sense.
I might do it with a sense of either with a lack of consideration or a lack of mindfulness. So of course it has a certain effect.
Okay.
Also, I think if I say it even about myself, right? If I just say, oh, they scored an effing goal on the World Cup, that's not about anything. But if I say, Michael, you were such a dumb F when you did this, right? So again, but then again, there's that negative intention, although it's towards myself.
Yeah. I mean, there are certain sections, it's a kind of, I guess, an anecdote. There are certain sections of the perfection vehicle, the ornament for clear realization commentaries, in which they explain some effects or residues of negative actions that might remain with us for a very long time. And so they said that even for those who have attained a state of liberation, there could be some still residues of negative actions that they've done before, even though they've eliminated all of them. And so it's quite an arbitrary description, and kind of when I read that, it always gives me a chuckle. So it says that in one text that I read, it says that arhats, which means those who have attained a state of liberation, they're completely free from samsara. They have developed wisdom, perceptual wisdom that perceptually realize emptiness. They have, of course, developed renunciation. Even when they attain a state of an arhat, they might arbitrarily jump. I don't know how it happens, but say that they might jump all of a sudden, or they might say female servant. I mean, this is what the text said. It's such an arbitrary comment, but I think that it's probably when we can think about it in relation to just habits that we develop. No, they're not positive habits. We want to eliminate some of them, or many of them, all of them, but there are some that are more destructive than others. So if I ever call you female servants, it's just negative tendencies. I don't mean that. Anyway. And so then the next one in line is idle talk or meaningless chatter. And so idle talk or meaningless chatter is sometimes called gossip. But I think that gossip is only part of it. No, gossip is part of it, but in general, it's speaking about things which do not have a lot of meaning, are not that important. They waste your time, but also waste other people's time. But I think that even more so, speaking about certain affairs gives rise to anger, attachment, and so forth in the mind stream. I consider when I hang out with friends, we do a lot of meaningless chatter that I want to avoid in general, but it happens. We live in a human society. We have friends. I have friends from not only the Buddhist world, but also family members and so forth. It's not that when I meet them, I can only speak in a virtuous way, although, ideally that would happen. I can steer a conversation to a more positive conversation, but also speaking in a way that doesn't have a lot of meaning is part of what we do in human society. So at least we want to make our speech to be a speech that doesn't give rise to a lot of afflictions, to attachment, to a great sense of attachment, to animosity and divisions and so forth. And so let's look at what constitutes idle chatter. So first of all, the basis is a meaningless topic. So Lama Tsongkhapa states 7 bases in his presentation. So speaking of fighting, fault finding, disputes and divisions. So we, I think, do that a lot in human society. Particularly, I think that this is a really hot topic, and I think that all of us, most of us, if not all of us, would agree with that social media increases the tendency to become divisive, to find faults in others, to create divisions, to highlight points of disagreements and so forth. And we are becoming affected by that. I mean, we're becoming so polarized in our society because we have those means that emphasize those points of difference. So that's for us constitute the first basis for meaningless chatter. And so the second one is speech such as transmitting and reciting text with a mind that delights in outside assistance. So Lama Tsongkhapa says that, I think that again, this is something that probably we can or need to be more creative in our understanding. And so he says that when you find joy in studying outside assistance, which means non-Buddhist philosophies. And I think that again, Lama Tsongkhapa was speaking to a community of monastics. And so if you have a community of monastics, their role is to study, reflect, and meditate on the Dhamma. So if you get sidetracked and look at other things, it's like idle chatter. I mean, we have our own fields of interest. We might even working with the academy, studying literature, philosophy, and so forth. So obviously, we might be also involved with things which do not have to do just with Buddhism. So then we can just think about it in terms of whether we'll if we, on the long run, working towards shifting our priorities, then we can definitely do other things in our life. But also long term, we want to shift our priorities slowly to being more, I think, genuinely engaged in a spiritual practice. Then the third base is expressions of helplessness. Then speaking of laughter, play, entertainment, etc., to talk about news of commotion, speaking like a drunkard or a lunatic, that happens a lot to me. The talk of one who maintains a wrong livelihood. So these are just examples. Lama Tsongkhapa says there are other things which constitute the basis of idle talk. And so I think that in general, when we think of what Lama Tsongkhapa is referring to in that list, and again, thinking about it from the point of view of being like a fully intended yogi, you want to limit kind of your communication with others so that you do not become sidetracked, and you want to focus mainly on your spiritual practice. We live in human communities. We have families, we have kids, we have partners. I mean, not me, but I guess of many of you. We live a life. We don't want to become awkward. You know, if you become awkward, if you become strange, if you become overbearing and unbearable, it's not going to be beneficial. So we find ways to kind of steer conversations to be more natural, more helpful. By Lorna, thank you very much for joining us. And so we try to steer a conversation, at least for our mind, to be more positive, or to have less avenue for becoming controlled by afflictions. Kodo?
It's not talk, but recently I do watch some Korean films and movies and so on. And I was studying Korean, so that's why I was, but I'm kind of addicted to them now. But when I was watching them, I was like, I'm wasting my time. It was the feeling of idle chatter, idle, like just too tired to study, too tired to meditate. So I'm going to buzz out on a Korean film.
Yeah.
Help.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, one of my all-time favorite is the Kill Bill movies. No, I just kind of love Tarantino. I love this kind of pop culture references in his movies, but I see how it kind of, it conditions me to think that some forms of violence are cool, are beautiful, are poetic, are pop culture, and so forth. So no, although Lama Tsongkhapa obviously didn't speak about watching movies and so forth, I can see the effect that it has over my mind. So no, I haven't given up on it completely, but you can say that in the great scheme of things, when we look at what affects our mind, what is the basis for our afflictive states of mind, we can also make then sometimes conscious decisions to reduce some of our involvement with those things. Even if we cannot give it up completely at the moment, at least we can reduce some of them. Yeah.
Nietzsche, did you have another question?
Yeah, certainly.
Sorry, was that Did someone say something to me?
Yes, did you have another question? I thought I saw your hand go up.
Oh, I can't remember it now. I think it passed through the flow, but chuck away the TV. That's what I say.
Yeah. I mean, I chucked away my TV when I was 24 or 25. And I had quite a few years of kind of freedom, and it was quite nice. But now everything is available online, not only through streaming platforms, Netflix and HBO and other things, but also just YouTube and everything. So, I chucked out the telly, but now I have everything on my computer in a centralized way. It's pretty hard to control.
I just remember. I remember the thing is, like, in my mind, I can get into this place of Dharma practice and not Dharma practice, and it just kind of creates tension and duality for me. So I'm really trying to, because I'm living and working in a disaster zone at the moment. This morning was up in an area with massive landslides and stuff, and so I'm trying to just see my life as the Dharma practice, as well as doing my formal Dharma practice, as well as trying to sit and look at teachings, and see my parenting as part of the Dharma practice. And I guess that helps. And another thing I do is, if I'm really missing the being in a kind of monastic setting, because I'm pretty sure I was monastic last life, I actually just visualize everyone in robes in meetings and stuff, which really helps. That part of my mind which misses that feels at ease, and I can see the beauty in how everybody's expressing themselves and how beautiful they are as human beings, and I'm not creating that division in my mind.
Yeah, visualize everyone in robes, but also with a hairdo or without a hairdo. All right. And so then, looking at the perception of that is that, which means that you need to just identify what you wish to express. And the affliction is any of the three poisons. The desire or the motivation is to express whatever unconnected thoughts occur. The performance is setting up about idle chatter, and we finish it with just speaking about it. Now, in terms of what makes such an action heavy, it says due to the weight of the previous three non-virtues of speech, which means that we might speak in a way that is meaningless, and it will give rise to either lying, to harsh speech, or to divisive speech, or it might be involved with them. It might be just kind of like we might speak of the weather endlessly and laboriously and boringly, but if it's not creating division, if we're not making people angry, it still could be idle chatter. But the one that gives rise to afflictions is becoming kind of a stronger path of action. And so also I think that also another interesting thing is that often we cannot really isolate those actions. Some actions, it's just one linear action. Often when we lie, when we fabricate a story, when we create a divisive situation, at the same time we're also being involved with idle chatter, with a meaningless chatter. And by the way, when we spoke about things that were explained in a particular way in scripture, but then in real life we have other situations. Like, for example, often they say that speaking of politics is idle chatter. So for monastics to speak about politics, I mean, it's in scripture, it says that if you speak about kings and ministers and so forth, we no longer live in countries, at least for us, we're not controlled by kings, we're not ruled by kings and queens and so forth. But still, it is said that in general, to have endless conversations about politics is idle chatter. However, when you look at Tibetan community, Tibetan politics, you have monastics which are politicians. And now, as a politicians, inevitably you have to do a lot of talking. And so you have, again, you have what is presented in scripture in a particular way, but then you have real life, and you need to to find ways to connect what is found in scripture and your real life, that's the way it is. And so then the effects of idle chatter. Causally concordant, others not listening to your words would not be respected or understandable, and your confidence would not be unshakable. The environmental effects of idle chatter is being in a place where fruit trees do not bear fruit, or bear fruit at the wrong time, or bear no fruit at the proper time, and the unripened appear to be ripe, the roots are not strong, the tree does not last long, and there are many comforts such as parks, groves, and pools, and having many reasons to be afraid. There are not many comforts such as parks, groves, and pools. So Lama Tsongkhapa, I think that obviously kind of living in a 13th, 14th century, in a country that was made of farmers or nomads and so forth, it spoke of the environment as being either, farmers and so forth, trying to produce fruits, seeds, and so forth. We can think of other areas in our life when we're trying to bring a certain plan to completion, and it can be brought to completion in a successful way. We experience no result at all, or even if seemingly we accomplish our desired end, it comes with a lot of other complications and so forth. I think that we can be creative in a way that we understand Lama Tsongkhapa's references. And so with that, we've completed looking at the 3 non-virtues of speech, verbal non-virtues. Let's go through the 3 non-virtues of mind. I think that they are more straightforward. Beginning with covetousness. So we have covetousness, ill will, and wrong views. And so the basis of covetousness is desiring the possessions or provisions of someone else. Now, the perception of that basis as such, and the affliction is any of the 3 poisons, and the concluding motivation is of desire. So definitely covetousness needs to be involved with desire. And so in general, when we think of what's the distinction between desire and covetousness, well, I consider, for example, just in general, I really like chocolates. So I have strong desires to chocolate, but it doesn't mean to say that I have covetousness in which I want others' chocolates to become mine. That I'm coming up with plans to deprive you guys from your chocolate bars. So I'd say that covetousness is a subset of attachment, more kind of stronger, detrimental form of attachment. And so the motivation is the desire to make it one's own. And the performance is making an effort for the object of that thought. Which means that in general, I think that what Lama Tsongkhapa means is that we let covetousness roam in our mind, dwell in our mind for a certain duration in which it becomes stronger and stronger. The more we think of something that we want, the more kind of we think that unless I have it, I'm not going to be happy. The key to my happiness is the thing that I desire. And so this is the performance, making an effort for the object of that thought. And of course, we might also come up with a plan to make that happen. And so to bring it to completion, we do it with a thought, may this possession and so forth be mine. As simple as that. Now, what makes covetousness become stronger is due to desiring offerings made to the Sangha and stupas. And with arrogance about one's good qualities, thinking that I deserve that. So definitely should become mine because I'm such a wonderful person, so definitely should be mine. Now, desiring to receive from kings, wanting to be appreciated or reciprocated by kings and so forth, from powerful people or from learned Dhamma friends, desiring profit and service for your own knowledge. And so there are many things that kind of we can think of, many scenarios in relation to covetousness, which makes me think that, at least remember that in the early years, one of my main teachers lives in Taiwan, and I remember that, way before being ordained. In the first few times that I went to see him in Taiwan, I saw that sometimes he received those kind of wonderful presents, wonderful offerings, and there was always this kind of thought in my mind, I wish I received that as well. I wish that I would receive those wonderful things. So that's an example of covetousness, or a sense of desire. Makes it stronger if you think that, if you're desiring stuff that belong to your gurus, your sangha, and so forth. And then another thing is desire for profit and service for your knowledge. So of course, we live in if you're a teacher, or if you teach a particular skill, like ceramic, pottery, painting, and so forth. If that's your business, you need to make a profit. That if that's your livelihood, you need to earn your own livelihood. In general, in the Dharma world, I think that the standards amongst Tibetans is that if teachings are given, as a teacher, you shouldn't think that if I give these teachings, I need to be paid that amount. And if you're not going to pay me, I'm not going to do it. So I think that in a more specific sense, it is often frowned upon if the Dharma is if a certain value is being affixed to the Dharma in general. And then causally concordant effect of covetousness is predominance of attachment and no contentment. I think that this is a given. The more we have that sense of covetousness, wanting others' possession, attachment predominates in our mind, and we find no contentment. And I think that I remember situations where all of a sudden I started to notice the degree of attachment present in my mind. And there were some situations where attachment felt like such a strong thirst. Often it is said that anger is pain and suffering, and we can identify with that. We can see how anger, as soon as anger arises, it causes pain in our heart. It's not that obvious with attachment, but there are some forms of attachment and covetousness in which when it arises strong in our heart, our mind is always disquieted. There's a sense of malaise in the mind where we think that if only I get that other thing, I could be happy. And so long as I don't have it, I cannot be happy. And it's also a form of pain. And the environmental effect of that is all excellent things will deteriorate and diminish every year, every season, every month, and even each day, and will not increase. So that with covetousness. Any questions about covetousness before we move on to malice, ill will, or harmful intent? All right, let's look at malice. So the basis for malice is a sentient being who has become the basis for the arising of a hostile mind. So it is similar to harsh speech. So again, you might have to penalize a particular person because you need to protect them, or you need to protect others. Now, for example, some people commit a crime. They need to face justice. They're being sent to prison. And you might think that if I taking part in something like that, am I not involved in ill will, in malice? Well, first of all, the basis for malice needs to be a hostile mind, an angry mind, and so forth. If someone needs to be penalized, sent to prison, pay a fine, whatever, and it's a way of, first of all, protecting society for people that are harmful, but also protecting them from themselves, protecting you from others, and so forth. If your mind is thinking of protection and also wanting to be of benefit to others, if someone is penalized, it's not considered to be ill will. But also, we also take into consideration that we live in a society that is based on rules, codes of conduct, legal system, and so forth. And if we do not maintain that system, our society falls apart and there is more damage than benefit. And so wanting the law to be upheld does not mean to say that you're working with malice or ill will, because the basis for that has to be either harmful intent, ill will, vengeance, and so forth. Often it's difficult to separate between wanting justice to be done, but also wanting for someone to pay for their deeds in the sense of kind of with malice. So kind of we have both of them occurring at the same time. So we just kind of need to look at our heart, and also in certain situations recognize or identify that sometimes we want justice to be done, but also because we want a person to suffer because they've done something wrong. So ill will is a non-virtue. And so that's the basis. And then the perception, similar to what we said before, can be mistaken or unmistaken, perceiving a living being to be a living being, and so forth. Any of the three poisons, anger, attachment, and ignorance, can be involved with that, but the concluding motivation is of hatred. And the motivation itself is the desire to hit someone and the like. It is the thought how nice it would be if this person were to be killed or bound, or his resources declined by themselves, or be taken away by others through someone else and the like. So having such motivations, wishing others to encounter negative circumstances, is the motivation. And the performance is, I guess, similar to the motivation. When we apply ourselves to that thought, to that motivation, it is a performance of ill will. And we bring it to conclusion with becoming resolute, or coming to the decision that I need to take that action. And so sometimes I think that sometimes we have a certain ill will arising in our mind, a certain malice. But together with that, we recognize as Buddhists that this is, first of all, a negative intention, negative motivation, and also it causes us to act in a negative way. So at the same time of giving rise to that thought, we also apply some remedy, or at least recognize it as a fault. So I would say that probably we don't bring it to completion, or even if we bring it to completion, it's in with a lesser power. So it's good to to at least be mindful of, as soon as a harmful intention arises in our mind, we reminding ourselves that we need to apply a certain remedy for that, so that it wouldn't be culminated in a forceful way. And so what makes malice become a weighty action is when directed towards your parents, relatives, gurus, those without fault, the poor, the suffering, the pitiful, and those who have done something wrong but confess this to you from the depth of their heart. And so when we think of the Bodhisattva vow, for those of you who've taken before the Bodhisattva vow, one of the root downfalls associated with the Bodhisattva vows is refusing to accept apologies to others. And definitely that's motivated by a sense of malice or ill will. So when someone apologizes sincerely, anything that in no way I will listen to that person, I don't like that person, in no way I'm going to accept their apology, may they feel better about whatever they've done to me, and so on and so forth, with that sense of malice, it's ill will. But also we can see how, in general, I think that's thinking about it from a psychological way, from a mind training way, so long as we hold on to an injury and want others to suffer because of the injury that they've given us, it's creating pain in our heart. Does not mean to say that if someone has damaged us before, created a great, acted in a way that is very negative, that they are free from the consequences of their actions. If their actions need to be remedied, and there is a way to remedy their actions, that's definitely a possible way of acting. But at the same time, holding on to a sense of vengeance in the heart is not healthy for mental health, but also definitely from a Buddhist perspective, it is a negative actions that has certain negative effects. And particularly, I think that the harsher effect is in terms of creating those mental habits and letting such behavior continue again and again in the future. So any questions or doubts with respect to malice? All right, let's look at the last one, which is wrong views. And that would be the last of the 10 non-virtues that we'll look at. And so wrong views, there could be, in general, there are different wrong views. We can have different wrong views, but in general, we can divide them into two types. There are wrong views in which we deny the existence of a particular thing. And there's a wrong view in which we take something that does not exist and claim that it does exist. And so, for example, I might think that, for example, Harry Potter exists. I definitely think that Harry Potter was a real person. Not only that, he really went to Hogwarts. That's kind of a wrong view, that in which I take something that does not exist and claim that it exists. It is a wrong view, but it's not the one that is intended in the 10 path of non-virtues. For a wrong view within the 10 path of non-virtues, I have to deny the existence of a particular thing. So it's a wrong view that is a nihilistic view, a deprecating view, but rather a more specific one, which mainly will cause my ethical discipline to go astray. So, for example, if I claim that karma, there's no such thing as karma. Whatever I do doesn't have any effect. My negative actions don't bring any negative results. And also my positive actions don't really matter because it's not going to matter at the end of time. This is a form of deprecation of karma. And so looking at what constitutes a wrong view. So first of all, the basis needs to be something that exists. Then the perception is perceiving as true the object that is being deprecated. And so I think that, yeah, certainly there are no past and future lifetimes. Hands down, there's no past and future lifetimes. And I think that this is true. It's a wrong view. One important thing to acknowledge is that we have doubts. Now, for most of us, I think that Koda said, I think in our first meeting, that from very young age, she used to believe in past and future lifetime. That's great. That was not my upbringing. And so if I can say that I still have doubts to a certain degree. We have doubts with respect to our ability to attain the state of enlightenment. We have doubts with respect to certain explanation of karma. So having doubt doesn't mean to say that we have a wrong view. It's okay to have doubts, but to conclude unanimously, definitely, hands down, 100% true that past and future lifetimes do not exist, and hold that to be truth, is what constitutes that wrong or non-virtuous path of action. So perceiving that to be true. And so the affliction involved is any of the three afflictions. The motivation is desire to deprecate, to deny something that exists. And the performance is setting about applying oneself to such deprecation. And so there are 4 divisions to the performance. So this is what we deny in relation to wrong views. So denying causes consists in the view excellent and faulty conduct do not exist. Again, thinking that my actions do not matter, they don't bring about any results. That's the first form of deprecation. The second is denying effects. The effects consist in the view fully ripened effects of those 2 do not exist. So I think that it's related to deprecating karma in general. My actions don't matter, they do not yield results. Also denying activities such as making offerings and so forth. And also denying the existing things such as arhats, Buddhas, the state of liberation and so forth, claiming that they do not exist. That is also a wrong view. Now, the weight in relation to the action is rejection of all fundamental tenets. This is the worst of all, in that if we believe that nothing in what we've discussed so far is correct, and we hold that to be true, as well as the view that in the world, there are neither arhats, those who have reached reality, which means those who have realized emptiness, those who have entered the path, those who have entered the path realizing emptiness, none of them exist, is considered to be the worst force of the worst type of deprecation. And I think that in general, we can say that I have covetousness sometimes, I have malice sometimes. I don't have such wrong views currently operating or acting in my mind, because while I have doubts in relation to some things, I do not definitively think that nothing whatsoever exists. Buddha doesn't exist, bodhisattvas do not exist. It's impossible to realize emptiness. It's impossible to eliminate afflictions. I do not hold those strong views. And therefore I can say that I don't have such wrong views. I think that probably for most of us, if not all of us, it's easy to avoid such wrong views, because while we might have doubts, we don't have to conclude definitively that definitely none of it exists. And so the effects of such wrong views, beginning with the causally concordant effect, is predominance of ignorance, having bad views and being deceitful. The environmental effect is being where the best and principal sources of resources will disappear, where unclean things will appear to be most pure, and misery will appear to be bliss, and where you will have no home, protector, and refuge. I mean, when we think of environmental effect, misery will appear to be bliss. I think that in some sense it is true with respect to the world that we live in now. You know, some things are miserable, but for us, they appear to be kind of what we actually want to attain. Now, we want to attain things that inevitably prolong our suffering in samsara. And so that's it with respect to the presentation of the 10 parts of non-virtuous actions. Thing that we almost have for today, but we will do next is look at certain factors that contribute to the weight of an action. So we'll look at that in the next session. And at some point, we'll also start to look at practices of purification using the 4 parts of the antidote. So any questions before we disperse for today? All right. And so let's finish off with dedicating all the positive potential we've created today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for contributing to our discussion today. I think that we all kind of contribute to each other's way of relating to this material. So we'll finish off with dedicating our virtue for the development of our own mind, for the development of bodhicitta, but we can also dedicate to the development of wisdom that realizes emptiness. And both bodhicitta and the wisdom that realize emptiness have to be dependent upon ethics. So we dedicate a virtue for being able to develop the ethical discipline which abstains from these 10 non-virtues. And so may the supreme jewel bodhicitta that is not arisen arise and grow, and may that which is arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. O powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain till samsara ends. Several of the snowland teachings and transmigrative beings who make extremely clear the path that is unification of emptiness and compassion. To Lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Finally, to Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and also including all of our other teachers in that, you uphold the Superior's moral way, who serves in the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading my gymnastic Torah doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels. Several of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Thank you. Thank you, people. For those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, good night. And for those of us in the Southern Hemisphere, be merry, be good and be merry. All right.
Well, remember, we have 2 more weeks, so look forward to seeing all of you guys over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, thank you very much for your contribution, Michael.